His final woe to the scribes and Pharisees is that they erect elaborate monuments for the prophets and say, if they had been around in our fathers' days, we would not have killed them. There's a great application today within the church. Many of the very same men who hold conferences and publish books honoring the reformers will go out of their way to destroy anyone who holds the same political and cultural views. Men who honor Calvin and Luther, who put busts of them in their offices and proudly display their every word that they ever wrote on their bookshelves, will dox and drive men out of their churches who believe the same things Calvin and Luther did. If we were around in the Reformation, we wouldn't have burned the reformers at the stake.
All right, so this, I think, pairs up nicely with one of the chief texts that we will be using from the Gospel of Matthew for this particular episode, which is, what's the text, the reference?
The reference is, Matthew chapter 23.
It's a parable.
Yeah.
And it's a parable about killing the Lord's servants, killing the prophets.
Or that's 21, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and then ultimately, the master of the vineyard says, well, surely they'll respect my son.
Yeah.
And they say, well, no, this is our chance to kill him too and take the inheritance.
Yeah, it's going to be ours.
Right. And so this idea of, we wouldn't have killed the prophets. Our fathers did that, but we'll build tombs to the prophets.
Yeah.
But then you killed Jesus.
Yeah.
And this is, the same thing that we see going on today. Like, oh, I love John Knox. No, brother, you would have excommunicated John Knox.
Yeah. What did you think about the trumpet blast of John Knox?
Right. Exactly. You hate John Knox because you're a feminist, deep down inside.
Yeah.
Deep down. As somebody said, I found it really funny. He was defining patriarchy, feminism, and then complementarianism. He said, patriarchy is when men lead. Feminism is when women lead. And complementarianism is when men lead in all the ways that their wives give them permission to. In other words, if you're complementarian, let's just be honest, you're a feminist. And so that's why you mentioned the trumpet blast. Like the modern day reformed guys who would claim to appreciate male headship and would have despised John Knox and despised Luther and despised all these different things. Yeah. And that's the very same thing that Jesus noticed during his earthly ministry is you guys say that you love Jeremiah, you love Isaiah, and our fathers, they weren't fan favorites in their day, and we recognize that we descend from the guys who killed them, but we're better. We get it now.
We get it. We heard their message and we love it.
Love Jeremiah, love Isaiah.
There's also, a tomb right over there. We donate money to keep the upkeep on it.
And also on a side note, please crucify Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
And so anyways, let's just start by, if you don't mind, could we read the parable in Matthew 23?
In 21, the parable of the tenants. Yeah. And so Jesus says, Matthew 21, starting verse 33, hear another parable. There was a master of a house who planted a vineyard and put a fence around it and dug a winepress in it and built a tower and leased it to tenants and went into another country. When the season for fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. And the tenants took his servants and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. Again, he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did the same to them. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and have his inheritance. And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. When therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? They said to him, he will put those wretches to a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the fruits in their seasons. Jesus said to them, have you never read the scriptures? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I tell you The kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him." When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them.
Yeah.
And although they were seeking to arrest him, they feared the crowds because they held him to be a prophet.
Very perceptive. Wait a second.
Well, it is amazing.
We perceive that you were talking about us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just said it's you.
It's amazing. Like, all the parables before this,
right.
everyone is like, what is he saying? I really don't know. That's hard to figure out, right? We talked about how they're riddles, right? Oh, I don't really know. I'm
the
not
parables
really sure.
were not meant to explain things in simple terms so that more could understand, but a fulfillment of Isaiah, that ever hearing, or listening, ever hearing, never listening, ever seeing, never perceiving. It was to conceal things.
It's like the dreams of Joseph, or the dreams that Joseph interpreted, like the Pharaoh's dream and the cupbearer's dream, the butler's dream. Yeah. They couldn't understand what these dreams mean. But earlier, Joseph has a dream, and he's telling his brothers about this dream. Well, I saw 11 stars bow down to me, and the sun and the moon bowing down to me. And his brothers and father and mother, they did not need an interpreter to know, oh, that's about us.
Right.
And we're going to bow down to you?
Right.
What? And so it's the same manner, right? All of these parables are just a mystery. Oh, what could this mean? Even the disciples have to go to Jesus and say, hey, can you tell us what that means?
Right, the parable of the four soils. What does that mean?
Tell us what that means. Here, the chief priests and the scribes, and remember, they are in the temple, right? They are in the temple, and Jesus is saying this. He's addressing the Pharisees, they're big, important religious leaders, right? He's addressing the chief priests, right? All of the most important religious officials, really the rulers of Israel, right, in the temple at Passover. So the temple is full of people. There are thousands of people there in public seeing Jesus saying this, right? This isn't in private. This isn't a private conversation. This is him in the temple. And by the way, like what had just occurred, right? All of the people, right, laid down palm branches and their coats and everything as Jesus comes in, and they're hailing him as the legitimate ruler of Israel. The king is here. The son of David is here. The high priest at the time was not a legitimate high priest. He was not descended from Zadok. He was an illegitimate high priest that came in during the time of the Maccabees. They set themselves up as both the kings and the priests there, and then they intermarried with the Herods and so forth. The kingly side did. And this high priest was set up, and he is not descended from Zadok. And so he's illegitimate. He's not the real high priest. Caiaphas, yeah. He is not a legitimate high priest. So he knows this. Everybody knows this. And so he knows his position is tenuous among the people. And here comes this Jesus, who all the people are hailing as the son of David, as the legitimate ruler of Israel. So what would he feel in this moment? He would be very envious of Jesus, very angry and very nervous about Jesus. So they attack him. Right, they attack him, and this is Jesus' response to them in public, in front of everybody. When I preached on this in my church, I likened it, and this will be Joel has been saying all the controversial stuff so far, right? This is the controversial thing I'll think of. Like, imagine and this is going on YouTube, so I have to be very careful how I say this, right? Imagine at some point in 2022, right? There's 100,000 people in Washington, D.C. Imagine an event like that. And hailing Donald Trump as the legitimate president of the United States, like during the State of the Union. And he just barges into the Capitol building and begins arguing with Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and things like that. And of course, I'm not making the comparison between Jesus and Donald Trump. I'm making an analogy. I'm not saying that they're the same at all.
Right.
I'm making the analogy in terms of the political dimensions of it. Right. What would that look like? That's what this looks like, right? This contested authority here in the temple. And he is telling them, right? He is telling them this. What are you doing? This is about them, and they know it's about them. He's telling them this parable about the vineyard. What's God's vineyard? It's Israel. And he says, I want fruit. I'm owed fruit. And there's no fruit to be had. And he sends his prophets to come collect the fruit. And what has Israel done all throughout their history? They've murdered the prophets. They've killed them. And finally, right, Hebrews says in the last days, right? Well, the last days have come. The last days for Israel have come. He sends the Son, and what do? They say, well, if we kill him, right, then the vineyard is ours. We could keep the inheritance. And what does Jesus? He asked them a question at the end of this. That's the amazing thing. He asked them this question. Right, what do you think the king is going to do when he finds out that they have killed his son? Well, he's going to come in, he's going to kill all of them and give the vineyard to somebody else. And Jesus says, right, he doesn't say, yeah, you're right. He says, right, have you not heard? Have you not read the scriptures? Right, the stone that the builders rejected is the cornerstone. Right, and this is the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. And yes, precisely, you have answered rightly that this vineyard is going to be taken away from you and given to somebody. Who is the somebody else? It is the Gentiles. It's the whole world, and it's the faithful remnant within Israel. Right, that's who it's going to belong to, not to you anymore.
Not to Israel, but to the world, to the Gentiles, and all those among Israel according to the flesh, but who are actually a remnant of Israel according to the promise,
according
who had faith
to the promises.
Then they would be welcomed as well. But one of the things that stands out to me about the parable and everything you just explained, so many of our modern evangelicals, if the verse wasn't sitting right there in the Bible, plain for all to see and to read in black and white, and you posed it as a question or some kind of pop, Christian quiz.
Yeah, like a little Bible trivia.
Yeah. And you said, how does Jesus respond? He gives this illustration, of these servants in a vineyard that, they kill the king's servants that he sends to collect the harvest. Then the king sends his son. They kill the son too. Now, what is the king going to do? And, the Pharisees and these religious rulers, they answer and say, well, the king's going to kill him, wipe him out, and give it to somebody else. Yeah. And then, if you said, and how do you think Jesus responds? I feel like most evangelicals would guess and say, Jesus would respond by saying no.
Yeah.
See, you would think that, but the beauty of the gospel is that God is far kinder than that. Whereas, but you know what I mean? Like you could trick up, you could trip up,
if you give it without attribution, you don't tell people what the rest of the story is.
Yeah, I mean, 95% of evangelicals would fail this quiz.
Yeah, maybe.
When the reality is that, that Jesus says, bingo.
Yeah, you got it.
You got it. That's right.
You are right.
That's right. What the king, in this case, and the king, of course, Jesus is talking about his father. He's talking about God. He says, yeah, you're right. The king, after you kill me, his son, he's going to kill you.
He's going to come back and wipe you out.
Yep, he's going to wipe you out, and he's going to do it by providence. And he's going to do it in the same timing that I'll tell you later about, Matthew 24, before this generation passes away. And he's going to take the kingdom and he's going to give it to others. Yeah. And that's exactly what God has done. Yeah. And so to think that there's still, we've at this point of the series, it's parable after parable, it's doctrine after doctrine and verse after verse. To think that there's still something left for a nation state of Israel. Not spiritual Israel according to the promise, not the church, true
something
Israel.
Left biblically, covenantally for these people.
Exactly. To think that but there's still some hangover promise. there's some part of the story. There's still all the words of Scripture are it's just finality after finality after finality. It's done. It's done. It's done. It's done. And it's not as though God failed through what he was doing with earthly Israel. No, he did precisely what he set out to do. He used Israel as the workers, the laborers, who through them he brought about the seed, who also is the stone, right? Who the capstone of Israel was never the building project. They should be thought of more likened to the construction workers.
Yeah, they're the workers.
They were the workers. And Jesus uses this exact language. They were the designated construction workers, and that was a privilege to be chosen and called to get to do such important work. And they were all used for centuries to finish the first stage of the building project, which was to carve out and establish and lay the first perfect stone, the capstone, to bring about the seed, the stone, the Christ. And then surrounding Christ and this stone was all the other foundational stones, the apostles and the prophets. And then by the end of the New Testament, the apostles are done, Old Testament, the prophets are done. Christ has come in his earthly ministry and has now died, resurrected, ascended, Pentecost, Spirit poured out, and Christ has also come back in a spiritual parousia in AD 70 as judgment, precisely as he said he would. It's done. And so now the whole foundation is laid, the apostles and prophets and Christ as the capstone, and now we're building walls and roof and this and that. And what is that? New Testament church.
Yeah.
That's what Ephesians says. We are being built together. And that's to Ephesians. That is Gentile Christians. We are being built together as living
Jews and
stones.
Gentiles together.
That's right. All believing Jews, that is those who accept Christ as Messiah, and all Gentiles who accept Christ as Messiah. The defining characteristic now is no longer natural birth, Jew or Gentile, or circumcision or non-circumcision. The defining characteristic now, only two categories, those in Christ through faith and those who are not.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's where we are today. And that basic understanding, that's what this whole series is espousing. It's just example after example biblically. Basically, every episode we're following this basic mold. Here's another scripture. Here's how it proves that God's done with Israel. And then the second half of the episode is, and here's why that matters.
Today.
In a relevant fashion today, because this affects politics, geopolitics, and affects the impending arrival of World War III. Like it has real applications.
Absolutely. Yeah, it affects our culture. It affects everything. And that is the thing. I mean, even in the last episode that we did, that one, I'm sure, when it's released, will be very controversial, but good. It needs to be. Like, this controversy needs to be approached head on. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We shouldn't be afraid of this discussion, because like if you have the right biblical framework for these things, right? If you understand that all of this is in the past, right? All of the Jew-Gentile distinction, all of these things are back here 2,000 years ago, and the modern people, right? We don't have them on this pedestal and think that they're the holy chosen people. They're just people like anybody else, right? There's good people and bad people. But they hold to a religion that is opposed, right? If they do hold to it, that's opposed to Christ, and we have to take account of that,
right?
We have to just call it as we see it, rather than pretending that something else is going on. That it's so many people are wrapped up in the post-war consensus, and at the conference that we did here in Texas with Stephen and CJ and Paul Gottfried, who is Jewish, by the way.
Right.
We did this conference, and that we talked a lot about the post-war consensus. This is something that people, right, the people that attack us, like, all these guys do is talk about the post-war consensus. But the way we summarized it, I was telling Stephen Wolf this, like, we were talking, like, how do you describe it in like one sentence? And I said, all right, what's the post-war consensus? It's that everybody and everything I don't like is Hitler. Right? Everybody and everything I don't like is Hitler. That's it. And so our entire moral framework is based around 1930 and 1940. And every bad thing is Hitler. Every failure to confront the bad thing is Neville Chamberlain. Saddam Hussein, Hitler. Vladimir Putin, Hitler. Donald Trump, Hitler. Right? That's the only moral framework that we have that is operable. And so if you dispense with that, if you adopt the moral framework of our forefathers and of Christians before the 20th century, right, you can look at these things and say, all right, here's a group of people. They're not Christians, right? Some of them might be, very hostile to the Christian faith, right? We have to be wary of them, right? We have to not allow them to have power in our culture and destroy Christian culture, but that also doesn't mean, therefore, that we have to treat them as this existential threat that are enemies. They're just other people that are not like us,
right? And
our laws will protect them, and that's the way America was.
They should be treated fairly, but they don't. They get to ride in the car, and be treated respectfully in the car. Yeah. But they don't get to drive.
It's like having a family, and you have foster children in your family, right? You wouldn't even give your own children the credit card or the family budget, but you're definitely not giving it to the foster child. You just take the credit card, do whatever you want. No, the Christian religion has to be central. It has to have cultural hegemony. And part of that cultural hegemony is the moral framework that we follow, that marriage is good, family is good, murdering babies is bad, pornography is bad, sexual degeneracy is bad. And we won't allow that to be subverted. Right? That's one of the fruits of secularism. And what secularism isn't just we have religious liberty now. Everybody can decide whatever they want. It's to say that there is no religious hegemon, right? There is no religious foundation in a society. It's a free-for-all. And you can understand why Jews as a group would want that, right? Because now Christianity, there's a Christian cultural hegemony. I won't feel like there's this powerful majority group that I'm living as a minority in, right? It makes you feel more comfortable, right? So you can see why, right? When you look through and see, okay, all of these different academics that supported secularism, right? That's why they were. Did you know that they were Jewish?
Right.
It's like, well, it makes sense why.
Yeah,
right.
Of course.
You don't want Christianity to be the potent moral force in the society
because it's not your team.
Yeah. Of course
you're not going to co-sign the victory of a team that's not yours.
Exactly.
Of course, you're going to be rooting for your own team.
Yeah, so you can see why they pursued it.
But then the Christian just has to be aware of that.
Exactly.
You have to realize.
It doesn't mean you hate them.
This person, I don't hate them. I'm not wishing ill for them. But they don't want my team to be robust and strong.
Yeah.
Because it's not in their interest.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Well, it means that I can't make them team captain.
Yeah.
If they don't want the team to win, I can't put them on the team and much less make them team captain. But that's what Christians do.
Yeah, what secularism is Christians end up doing that.
Christians are constant, Judeo-Christian, and then the tail actually wags the dog.
Precisely.
They're like, emphasis on Judeo and,
that's Christian
minor, a little Christian.
Yeah.
And so...
Because, what does that do? It is, and Stephen said this in Ogden.
Right.
Right, Judeo-Christian actually enhances and supports secularism.
Yes.
Because that's not a real religion.
No.
That's an amalgam of two opposing religions. And when you say, well, I believe in the Judeo-Christian God, well, that isn't a God that exists.
That God doesn't exist.
Right. There isn't a Judeo-Christian God. They don't have a triune God. Jesus is not their God.
Right.
And so what it does is it subverts Christianity, because you can't say Jesus is Lord. Right. You have to say the lowercase g God of the civil religion is Lord. Right. In God we trust is lowercase g in that case.
We briefly interrupt this programming to humbly offer to you a simple life hack. This series, all things pertaining to Israel, covenant theology, the Judeo-Christian Psyop, the whole 9 yards. This is available right now exclusively for our Patreon members at patreon.com/Right Response Ministries. Depending where you're at in the series, you may have to wait all the way up until 2.5 months to be able to see the whole thing, because it's dripping out to the public once a week on Fridays at 8 p.m. Central Time. But this is a 9-part series, and all 9 episodes, right now, uninterrupted, ad-free, are available exclusively to our Patreon members, again, at patreon.com/Right Response Ministries. In addition to this series with myself and Pastor Andrew Isker on Israel, we also have a whole other series that's 10 parts, ad-free, with myself and Dr. Stephen Wolfe on Christian nationalism. Both of those series are available ad-free today, again, at patreon.com/Right Response Ministries. All right, the clock is running out. You need to go and register now for our Christ is King, How to Defeat Trash World Conference. It's happening the year of our Lord 2025, April 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That's a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And by God's grace, we're able to provide for you an all-star lineup. We've got Steve Dace, Calvin Robinson, Orrin McIntyre, Dr. Stephen Wolfe, Eric Kahn, David Reese, Andrew Isker, John Harris, A.D. Robles, Dan Burkholder, Dusty Devers, Ben Garrett, C.J. Engel, and yours truly, Pastor Joel Webben. Come on out, join us April 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2025, Thursday through a Saturday. Go to rightresponseconference.com to register today. Again, that's rightresponseconference.com.
Right. Let's go back real quick to the post-war sentiment. You said, what is the post-war sentiment? It's everything. I like what you said. I think it was, it's just true, simple and true.
Steven stole it from me. If people have seen that video, he stole it.
But you said, the post-war sentiment, in a nutshell, is saying anything that I don't like is Hitler. And just, I was, as you said that, I was just thinking of fleshing it out just a little bit more and saying, begging the question, why?
Yeah.
Why? Like, think about this for a second. Why are there like 7 Hollywood films on World War II and the evil of Hitler annually?
I was going to say every year, not just total.
No, almost like it's a quota that has to be filled. Like, do you feel like Hollywood puts out as many Stalin movies?
No, like even the one that was really good, The Death of Stalin, that was a British movie.
Right, Hollywood didn't do it.
Hollywood in America never makes any movies about the Soviet Union. There was a good movie, really horrific movie about the crimes of the Soviet Union in Ukraine, produced by the British. Right, the Killing Fields movie about the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, the communists there, British. Right, they're never any movie. So it's like Senator McCarthy was right. Hollywood is full of communists.
Yes, and that wasn't even my main point.
I think
that's
true.
That's true. So there is.
Why isn't it everybody we don't like is Stalin?
Right. Exactly. Right. But why Hitler specifically? Yeah. And so it's because and people begin naturally modern Americans think that way. They they think don't be Hitler.
Yeah, he was bad.
I heard, I have it on good authority. Hitler drank water. Don't drink water.
Right.
Anything. I don't want any similarity, any tie to Hitler. And I've thought about that, and I've thought like, okay, so we have been very indoctrinated into the evils of Hitler, and so I want to break this down a little bit. One, I think because a big thing that shapes Americans is entertainment and media. Yeah. And entertainment and media has a very disproportional, representation of Jews who really, for decent reason, don't like Hitler. Makes sense.
Yeah, I can see why.
So that's part of it.
That makes sense.
But let's just quickly move past that, because I think that's not my big point. Is not to say that Hollywood is owned by the Jews and blah blah blah. That's really not my big point. It's not. We can save it for another episode. There's a lot of truth in it, But anyways, that's not my main point. My main point is to say the post-war sentiment, aka everything I don't like is Hitler. Okay, but why Hitler and not Stalin? Or why? Because Hitler historically is the bad guy on the right. Mm-hmm. See, that's the issue. So just just a spoiler alert here.
Totalitarian, authoritarian on the right.
Just so that everyone can lean back in their chair and not freak out and feel at ease. This is not going to be, neither Andrew or I are Hitler apologists. So this is not going to be Adolf Hitler's The Last Christian Prince episode. We're not doing that. I believe
the more I hear about that guy, the more I don't care for him.
Right. I think that Hitler was a bad guy. Andrew thinks that Hitler was a bad guy. But here's the point, and it does matter. We both think that he was a bad guy, but we don't think that he was the worst bad guy.
Or the only bad guy.
Or the only bad guy. And yet, since 1945, you would think so. If aliens had been monitoring the planet, for the last, 80 years.
Right, and there's only one bad person that ever existed in history.
If they were looking from the outside in and watching, the media and watching entertainment, every film made and every, museum and every historical lesson taught in schools, they would think that all of human history, they have only had one nemesis, Adolf Hitler. Only one true nemesis.
I remember being a child or a teenager in junior high school, and when you're 12 or 13 years old, like you get obsessed with World War II. Like Joel here, I don't know if the camera can see it. Like he has this time-lapse series of World War II. I had the same one when I was a kid. I read every single one of those books. I was just I was obsessed and reading biographies of Patton and Douglas MacArthur and things like that. And I remember discovering...
Is Patton the one who said we fought on the wrong side?
We defeated the wrong enemy or something like that. And then mysteriously ended up dead shortly thereafter.
And with that, if my memory serves me, he said, I'm convinced that we fought for the wrong side. But then beyond that, he said, I fear that because of that and the outcome of the war, that in 50 years' time, that Americans that the nation would be degenerate.
Yeah, would be destroyed.
But destroyed from the inside out in terms of morals.
Yeah, and what he wanted was
virtues.
All right, take all of these surrendered German units, rearm them, and send them east. Right, that was it. We need to fight the Soviets.
Right, the Bolsheviks.
And I remember discovering that as a child, and just discovering the fact that Stalin, this guy who we're allied to, killed tens of millions of people.
Right.
And we had a year-long class in junior high about the Holocaust. I had to read that in my just side reading because I was a nerd.
Right, because you weren't taught that in school.
And I was like, whoa, we were on the side of another bad guy. Why am I not told about this?
There were two bad guys.
This is crazy.
Right.
There were two bad guys and we picked one. Mm-hmm. Right. Whoa. And the idea, the crimes of the Soviet Union are so barbaric and so evil,
right.
And no one has any idea about them at all. And many Americans, because of the post-war indoctrination, think this was the Great Holy Crusade. But what did we end up doing? We gave half of Europe to this horrible dictator who murdered millions of people.
Right.
And we were the good guys in that.
Of course,
I think of that, and I think, actually, the 20th century is way more complex. It's not this black and white struggle. It's a lot of black and black, actually.
Right.
And so when the 20th century becomes much more complex, and the complexity isn't that, maybe one side maybe we were on the bad side and that's the good side, but rather.
But you don't have to do that. You don't exactly.
Yeah.
You don't have to, and you don't have to say Stalin was bad and therefore Hitler was the last Christian prince.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that.
You don't have to do that either. No.
Right. You can say no. Hitler was bad in his
complex.
own right. It's complex.
Yeah.
Hitler was bad in his own right, and so was Stalin and Churchill. Not on equal terms. I'm not saying that by any stretch. I'm not.
It'll be a whole episode to talk about Churchill.
I know. I'm not. So I'm not saying he's as bad as Hitler or as bad as Stalin. But Churchill had some major problems, some major virtues, and some major problems.
Yeah.
He was a bit of a warmonger.
Yeah.
And his involvement, kind of like a pit bull that just grabs something and won't let go, was not particularly helpful in hindsight.
No.
And so, all that being said, my point is the post-war sentiment. What is it? It is everything I don't like is Hitler. And then what I'm asking is one step further. Why Hitler? It's because Hitler is the bad guy on the right. Mm-hmm. And what we need, I think, in combating the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist, the globo homo, that we're currently under this progressive, liberal, transient.
There's bad guys on the right and the left.
Right. What we need to do is one of the things. There's a lot that we need to do. We need to preach Christ and Him crucified and see a great many people born again. But there's a lot of things we need to do. We need to run for local office and win and legislate righteous laws. But another thing that we need to do is understand history. And we need to understand that regardless of what side we were in on the war, I think one thing that we should all be able to agree with is that America and the West at large, in terms of the populace, our people, and our virtues and our values, it has not improved since 1945.
No. We've
become far more immoral.
Yeah. Yeah, since 1945 is when
degenerate.
Secularism begins to take off. Right? When we are no longer exclusively and particularly Christian.
Also when the term Judeo-Christian takes off.
And now we are secular, and there is no exclusive Christianity that's the cultural hegemon. Now it's just
because
all
if there
religions
was,
are equally valid.
That would be like Hitler.
Exactly. Like Matt Walsh talked about, or was it Matt Walsh? Maybe I don't want to misspeak. One of those conservative, I think it was him, talked about Weimar Germany and the transgender clinics and the books and all of these things, and implied that it was a Nazi, right? When the reality is the books that were being burned, were the transgender and pro-homosexual and all of those books, right? And it's no, man, you got it completely wrong.
And who put those books there?
Yeah, I know, and so. The point...
Overreaction? Yeah. Sure. Atrocities, sin?
Evil things. The point...
But what people are trying to do today on the left is they're trying to say, well, you can't... they're saying you can't have a country, you can't have values, you can't have family, you can't have tradition, you can't have religion, because
second you have
Hitler
those things,
stood for all those things.
Right, the second you have things, then boom, you have Hitler.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the whole point. When we say the post-war sentiment, the first time I heard the term was Reno, reading The Strong Gods.
Yeah.
And his whole point in that book was saying there are weak gods and strong gods. The weak gods are universalism, globalism, versus
egalitarianism.
And then whereas nationalism would be a strong god. Progressivism and versus like religion, tradition. Atomized individualism versus families. And he just kind of goes through all these feminism versus and egalitarianism versus patriarchy and father rule. And so he just goes kind of like, side by side comparison of here are the weak gods, here are the strong gods. And when you look at it like that, that's when you realize why Hitler must be engraved for all time as the worst bad guy. Because although there were abuses and although he really was a bad guy, he was one of the few bad guys on the right. On the right. And that had the strong gods, patriarchy, nationalism, tradition, religion, family. And so that's why. And so shedding the post-war consensus is basically, I think, just red pilling and saying no to the Psyop and saying, I'm not a Hitler apologist, but nationalism, good. Patriarchy, good. These things are good.
And part of this, I think...
And if Hitler stood for these things, well, he stood for them poorly. But that doesn't make these things bad. Hitler also drank water, but I'm still going to drink water. Goodness gracious.
Well, and that's part of it, is the rejection of the post-war consensus and the post-war moral framework is a rejection of that line of thinking, of viewing the 20th century as much more complex than the Marvel version of history that we're given as children.
Right.
And which doesn't mean that immediately you say, oh, actually Hitler was good. It's that you view the world in the complexity of reality rather than this silly fiction. And on top of that, right, you're able to say, you call me this, and I think it's kind of played out, right? Because Trump has been called Hitler for 8 years, and he's not, right? Like he has,
not even close.
Right, like the joke from he has Jewish grandchildren, right? He's not Hitler, and so people hear that. I mean, it's just like the term racist, right? You get called that enough, and it just falls on deaf ears. Eventually, it loses its power, and I think the power of the post-war consensus and moral framing is dying off, where people are seeing, right, well, if I oppose transgenderism and homosexuality and abortion and no-fault divorce and pornography and all of these things.
And giving billions of dollars to other countries.
Yeah, if I want to stand for my own country, I don't want my country invaded by tens of millions of foreign people, right? I want a distinct people as my country. And in the past, for 40, 50, 60, 80 years, if you stood for those things, you'd be called Hitler.
Right.
And now people are like, I don't care if you call me that. I want those things.
Yeah. Oh, Hitler. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so the danger in all of this is that many young men have noticed, right, this psyop that's being played on them, and they swing right into the other ditch.
Well, and that's the
part. Say, actually, he was good.
Part of the reason they swing into the other ditch, to be fair, is because there is... on this issue, honestly, on this issue of Israel and alleged anti-Semitism, and like, just to be frank, there are no mature leaders who are on what we would consider to be the correct side of the aisle, but holding a reasonable position.
Yeah, there isn't any leadership for them.
So exactly. So the moment that a young man crosses the aisle, and the don't believe your lying eyes rhetoric doesn't work any longer, and he's just noticed too much because it really is that blatantly obvious.
He has nowhere else to go.
And he crosses the aisle. Well, the moment he crosses the aisle, there's no reasonable, wise, mature leader over there. So my point is to say that one of the ways to stop that, that you always have useful idiots. But you don't have to have useful idiots by the millions, I'd like to think. Right. One of the ways
you don't want your guys to be idiots.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the ways to stop an unnecessary surplus of useless idiots on the right is to get some wise and mature men on the right. Yeah. But what happens if all the wise and mature men also happen to be cowardly men? Yeah. And on some issues they're on the right, and thank God for it. Yeah. But on this issue, for whatever reason, they're like, no, Judeo-Christian, is the line in the sand.
Yeah, because I don't want to be called Hitler.
It's a deal breaker. I will not,
I don't want to be called a Nazi for, or just all the political issues that are quintessentially rightist, that are finally coming back into prominence, whether it's borders or whether it's family values, things of this nature. The reason they haven't been, the reason we've lost, is because they could run this play on us constantly.
Right.
And men, like you said, are afraid.
Yeah.
They're afraid of these things. But you have this large glut of especially young men, who are rejecting the caricatured history that we've been given, rejecting all of these. They're noticing certain patterns in society, and they have nobody, like you're saying, they have nobody to look to say, hey, just tell me the truth. I feel like I'm going crazy. I feel like I'm going to be a social pariah if I believe these things.
Tell me the truth, and then also tell me how, in a righteous Christian way, how to respond.
Yeah, how do I live my life in light of knowing these things?
Right. So what do you do with disproportional statistics about people groups?
Yeah.
Like what do you do with the fact that there's a magnitude of 6 times the amount of crime, particularly homicide, from the black community to the white?
Yeah.
What do you do with that? Like, that is a real statistic, but what we need is godly men to say, to stand right next to them and say, that is true.
Yeah, our leaders so far have just that's not happening, and you're a bad person for knowing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or that's the conservative leaders. Then the woke leaders will say,
it's actually due to white people.
It's actually due to white people, and it's because the laws are racist, and because the prison system is racist, and because this is racist. So the good guys, the conservative guys, are saying, well, those statistics are skewed, or it's because of this, or it's because
of Democrat policies.
Right, exactly.
Things like that.
So what you need is godly guys on the right with courage, who are able to look, to stare truth in the face. And it's hard to look at the truth, because the truth sometimes is really ugly and scary. And to be able to look it in the face and say, no, you know what, that really is true.
Yeah.
But here's how to respond to that. Here's a righteous course of action. There are, by the grace of God, there's hope, there's white pills, and there's ways to respond to this in a godly way. And you know how you respond to it in a godly way? Whether it's, but it seems like more Jews disproportionately are involved with pornography, or more black people are committing crime. Okay, well, you know what? We don't have to pretend. We can look at statistics, but we also then don't have to go after people. What we go after is wickedness.
Yeah.
We go after wickedness. And the beautiful thing about going after wickedness is, you say, well, you know what? Let's have a Christian nation. Let's work towards a Christian nation where porn, by the grace of God, is not only a sin, but it's a crime. Yeah. And there are actually penalties. Yeah. And then what do you do? Well, you solve the problem.
Yeah,
that solves the problem. So you don't have to have the crusade to isolate one people group. No, you pursue righteousness.
You deal with the wickedness.
Yes. Yeah. So what if? And I'm not saying so what, because that's almost too cavalier. That's doing the very spineless thing that I'm talking about. But it does matter. There is a so what. It does matter. But at the end of the day, what do you do about? Per capita, this group over here is this way, and at a higher rate than this other group over here. Well, then have a meritocracy. Yeah. Let the cream rise to the top, and you know what you'll get? You might end up getting a lot of white guys, but you also get Clarence Thomas. Praise God for him. Yeah. That's a great win. You'll get some Thomas Souls, and then you're doing it, and you'll have the best men, and then you're doing it without being unhinged. Yeah. Without going without overcompensating. Yeah.
But in order to get there, in order to have this idea of,
you need some older men with wisdom and courage.
Yeah, you need older men with wisdom and courage, and the courage is the biggest thing, right? The most important thing to be able to say, I don't care what you call me, I care about what is true. Right. Right. I'm going to pursue what is true and right and good, regardless of whatever you call, because you're going to be called these things, and you just have to not care. Right. Right. It has to be water off of a duck's back. Right. And you do need these older, wiser men that can corral the young guys and point them the way forward and say, don't go into that ditch. Right. Right. Stay away from that. Right. Follow this path. Right. Don't hate this group of people because they make porn. I hate them. You need to hate porn.
Or you could even hate individual guys who actually do that. Yeah. but you can't hate everybody because there's plenty of people who don't do that.
Yeah, precisely.
You have to, there has to be equal weights and measures. I don't want to be treated that way.
Yeah.
I don't want to be treated, you're
a white guy, you must be bad.
I mean, you could do it with gender. You could say, in terms of statistics, men commit more crime than women.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, I hate all men.
Yeah, men
Well,
are bad.
I don't like when the feminist does that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can't, we've got to be consistent. But
we also can't say that, more men go to prison for crime. That's systemic oppression of men.
No, we have to say, no, men actually do commit more crime.
Yeah.
They actually do.
Yeah.
And so what do we do about that?
We put men who commit crime in prison.
That's right. Amen. Amen. All right. Well, that's today's episode. Any final thought? I feel like it was a good one.
Yeah, it's great.
Do you think we're being too spicy? I feel like this is milquetoast.
Yeah,
I feel like this is super mild.
I feel like what we are presenting
It's logical.
Is the reasonable course of action. Like the thing that we want to have for young men is older men. Yeah, we're old. You have gray in your beard now. If I grew a beard, it would be
We're getting older.
Yeah, we're getting older.
But we're not old.
But I feel like we are presenting the reasonable course of action for young Christian men on the right, so they don't go down the dark paths. Right. That's in talking about these. Like I don't want to talk about ordinarily I wouldn't want to talk about these things. I don't want to be thought of as the guy who talks about Jews all the time. Right. There's a lot more I like talking about actually, and but I see the fact that none of our leaders are talking about these things anywhere, or if they do, they paper over it, they hide it, they tell you, don't look over there, don't look at the big elephant in the room, right? No, we should address it, because if they don't go to us, if they don't get leadership from pastors and men that care about their souls, they'll go to men that do not care about their souls and do not care about righteousness.
That's right. Well said. Thanks for tuning in.